Welcome back to Racing Rundown here on YouTube. I'm Eric DeCoster. In this Kentucky Derby profile, we'll be taking a look at Crown Pride, the Japanese representative in this year's Kentucky Derby, a horse who got here via the UAE Derby win. Get to that race eventually. A very cool story, and of course, we know how much the Japanese have been dominating on the international stage in the past few months. Obviously, Breeders' Cup, two winners there. They dominated in Saudi Arabia on Saudi Cup Day. They dominated in Dubai on Dubai World Cup Day. And now they have an American representative here in Crown Pride. He'll be ridden by Christophe Lemaire, who put together a lot of those big wins in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, and at Maidan. And of course, the trainer Koichi Shintani, a great story. He was an assistant for a very long time. He only really started training in 2019. Obviously, you don't have many horses in Japan. They limit the amount of stock you can have. Crown Pride was his first ever grouper graded stakes winner, so great to see him now be on the international stage. Crown Pride is owned by a member of the Yoshida family, very prominent family in Japanese horse racing. They've had plenty of great runners. The Silks might look familiar. Mind Your Biscuits most notably ran in those Silks towards the end of his career. So a lot of good things going on with these connections. Great to see another international representative in the Derby. It's a lightly raced horse, only 4 career starts. He's won 3 of them. This being one of them. We're taking a look at his maiden win. You see him in that red cap and the yellow and black silks there. He was fighting the rider for a good portion of the time. He broke a touch slow. You'll see that kind of become a recurring theme for this guy from his first few races. But now he's on the lead and he's starting to draw clear. This was a 9 furlong newcomers race, so for horses that had never run before, and he handled them with ease. As you can see him drawing away without too much asking, being ridden by a local Japanese rider in this spot. But a good win. No matter what, you have to be impressed with this. The distance is a big thing. That's another recurring theme you'll see. There's a guy who loves to run for days, and he does it here, going 9 furlongs on debut back in October. We'll skip over start number 2 in terms of watching it, but he did get a nice allowance win there at a Han Shin in November, going over the same distance, 3 length win. Very impressive, very similar to his first race. But let's go back to the start really fast here and take a look at Crown Pride. There's 3 big elements in this first start at 2. I'll pause it for a moment. This is his first start as a 3-year-old, excuse me, at Tokyo. It's the Hyacinth Stakes, which is a race on the road to the Kentucky Derby, the Japanese edition. And well, he had a lot of excuses. He was cutting back to a mile for the first time over a muddy track. I don't really think that was much of an excuse, but notable nonetheless. But the biggest thing was cutting back in distance, and you'll see the portions in the race where he encounters trouble. I'll let it run now. And you can see him at the start. He is the 9 horse here, red cap, and towards the back, or green cap, excuse me. He gets pinched out pretty badly. He gets squeezed to the back. We saw from that maiden win, and it was apparent in that second career start, that's not really where he wants to be. So he is traveling in the rear of the field for the first time after breaking slowly. That's something we did see on debut, but it really hurt his cause here. So he's out of position early on. He's chasing against probably the toughest group he's ever faced. He's risen from a newcomer's race to a handicap to now this stakes race against some of Japan's best dirt 3-year-olds, and he's moving up. And you can see right here, he's just coming into the screen on the bottom green cap. He runs up on heels. He gets uncomfortable. As you can see, that 7 horse is having a lot of trouble in front of him. He's not dealing with that too well either, being on the outside. So 2 things have already gone poorly for him. Poor break, getting into some trouble on the backside. He's wanting to move up. He's wanting to put himself in the race. Now here comes another element that's horrible. He has to go wider than anybody else on the course while he's still trying to make up ground. And he's traveling. I mean, you have to love that. He's still moving. The rider starts to get after him here, and he's certainly well within contention. And right here, I thought maybe he has a chance, but you can tell he's kind of run his race. He's had too many excuses. He's still coming along well while these others are still there. And at the end of the day, he just kind of gets outrun to the wire by the eventual winner, Combustion, who's coming up the rail right now in that red cap with the blue sleeves. That horse was one of the favorites in the UAE Derby that we'll see in a moment. And really, these horses that finish in front of him probably preferred that 1 turn mile more so than Crown Pride, who I think that was the biggest thing. In addition to the trouble, he didn't like the cut back in distance, and he didn't like the fact it was a 1 turn race. He certainly seemed a little lost out there, even with all the trouble, and I thought that was a huge excuse heading into the UAE Derby. And here is the UAE Derby, the race that secured Crown Pride a spot in the Kentucky Derby starting gate with his win. Tough to see, but you just saw him get bumped there by the horse in that orange silks. Actually, let's get back and take a brief look at that again. You can see, I wish the camera angle here was different. You'd be able to see it much better. But you can kind of see The Gilded Age was in this orange cap right here with the green sleeves, comes out into Crown Pride with the red cap and the black and yellow silks, and does give him a bump. But he breaks well, and what I really like about Crown Pride here is he works himself into the position early on. He showed that in his first race. You might have seen it. He broke a touch slow and then worked himself up into a good stalking position, and he does the same here. He moves between horses, gets into position. The rider that day was Damian Lane. He's not going to be riding back in the Kentucky Derby. That'll be Christophe Lemaire for the first time. But no matter what, Damian Lane has put him in excellent position right here. They're going to touch quick on the front end. It was probably a little closer than I would have liked to have seen him because Summers tomorrow, the leader, was going pretty quick. And to the outside, he has two sprinters really pressing him toughly. So the fact that Summers tomorrow is so close was a cause for concern for sure. I thought maybe that some deep closer would come get him late, but he's traveling here nonetheless, really responding well to the rider's cues and about sixth at this point, well within striking range. Outside of horses, he's avoided all trouble other than that slight little brush at the start. And here you see him start to make a big move as he starts to move past some of those tiring sprinters in front of him. The leader Summers tomorrow, you'll see how gritty that horse gets in the lane. But nevertheless, you can see right. You have to feel pretty confident. I had Crown Pride in full transparency in this race, and I was feeling very confident at this point. He is doing everything right, and now into the stretch, you'll see him kind of duke it out, battle with Summers tomorrow for a little bit before putting him away. But it was just a very strong win here. He was about 16-1 in the U.S. and around 20-1 in foreign markets. A little overlooked, but you can kind of tell where those excuses came from. And obviously, this being his third career win, is he's kind of hanging on the wrong lead. That's not something I'm too worried about. He clearly is still battling with some inexperience issues. He was very green on debut. He had trouble in that last race, and here he's hanging on the wrong lead late. But it doesn't bother me. He clearly can stay for days. He's finishing through the wire with power, with energy. He'll gallop out strongly, as you'll see. He's a good horse. No doubt he likes this distance, the mile and a quarter. I think more than most in this year's Kentucky Derby, he'll really use that as one of his strengths. But the progression's been good. He's 3 for 4 lifetime. His only loss, he had a handful of excuses. He's really done nothing wrong. The only thing that can beat him, I think, is himself, and of course, if he can't match the talent of those other horses in the Kentucky Derby this year. Let's break down Crown Pride a little bit more before we head out of here. No speed figures to go off of course, being run overseas for all 4 races. Fine with me. I much rather prefer analyzing the animal as an individual than taking a look at all the other supplementary things. Let's just take a look at what he is. Ridden by Christophe Lemaire, who's probably one of the best riders in the world right now, if not the best. And we already touched on his trainer, Koichi Shintani. No teether at the end. Sorry for accidentally including that. The pro's the distance. He clearly wants to run all day. He's coming off a career best effort in his most recent outing in the UAE Derby, where, I mean, he's undefeated around 2 turns. You have to really like that. He's undefeated when he's been allowed to run 9 furlongs or longer. And really, the distance isn't what necessarily beat him in the Hyacinth Stakes 2 back. It was more so all the trouble he endured. That being said, he does have to match the quality of horses. As we kind of linger into the cons quickly, the UAE Derby in general never produced a Kentucky Derby winner. The best finish was 6th in 2016 with Mubtahij, or maybe 2015 with Mubtahij. Sorry for that. I mean, they're always kind of coming late. It's very interesting. The UAE Derby winners that do come to the U.S., they're usually within decent contention when the wire comes, but they've never been close to winning it. Of course, the Japanese shipper element comes in. The Japanese have dominated with horses that probably shouldn't have. I mean, you go back to the Breeders' Cup Distaff last year. Marshall Lorraine had no business winning that race, but she just was able to get it done and really put down some of America's best distaffers. And Crown Pride could kind of do the same here if he wants to. But that's the thing. We don't know how good he actually is. The quality of victories, not against this level of horses. I mean, this is not the greatest crop of 3-year-olds in my opinion, but they're good enough. And we just have no barometer of how good Crown Pride is in relation to those other runners, your Epicenters, your Tabas, your Messiers, your Waidabarias, Mo Donegal, so on and so forth. We have no idea how good he is. The horses he beat in the UAE Derby, a cut below. And the UAE Derby usually throws out some pretty decent horses, but this year's race was rather weak. So I have no idea how to balance it. I wish I could give you a magic answer and say, yes, he's beaten good horses, he'll factor here. Or, no, he hasn't, and he's going to be way overmatched. I have no idea, and that's a really big concern. But you do know he's going to get the distance well, and that he's coming off some of his best efforts. He's never lost around 2 turns. He's never lost going longer, 9 furlongs or longer. He has some of the best connections in the world behind him right now. The final con to touch on is the gate speed. You saw it on debut. You saw it. He was bothered in the Hyacinth, the only race he lost two back, more so than he broke slow, but he did still break a touch slow and got shuffled back. And then in the UAE Derby, he was still a bit slow, a bit slower than the rest of the field, even with Gilded Age initiating that contact. In the Kentucky Derby, if you break slow in a 20-horse gate, especially this new full 20 slot gate they have now, rather than the 14 plus the auxiliary gate, there is much less space and much less room for error. We saw it last year really affect Essential Quality and Rock Your World both. And for Crown Pride, if he doesn't get out in those tight quarters, he could find himself last within the first 100 feet, and that's not where he wants to be. We know he wants to be in a stalking position, otherwise his run can't be sustained as well, because we know what happens when he has to come from last. He can endure things like he did in the Hyacinth two back. If he can get away well and find himself in good position early on and settle and respond to all the riders' cues, he'll run like he did in the UAE Derby. So as good as he's looked, there are two very big unknowns, and that's the quality victories and getting out of the gate. But if he can do those things, the distance, and if he can run like he did in the UAE Derby, maybe take it one step further, he'll be a contender for sure. Try weighing those positives. I don't know. I don't have a good read on him. I won't have a good read on him until the race is run, really, because of all those unquantifiable cons that he does have. But the pros are good. They stand out, and he might just have a chance to be the first Japanese winner of the Kentucky Derby. That's all I have for you guys on this Kentucky Derby profile. We'll see you next time here on Racing Rundown.